2013's The Conjuring was such a massive success that it has since spawned 7 sequels and spin-offs, partly due to being a well-made film, and partly also due to 5 little words. Based on a true story. This phrase alone set The Conjuring apart from other similar horror movies, letting viewers know that this horrifying tale was not, pardon the pun, conjured up by director James Wan, but instead a retelling of events that supposedly actually happened. Of course, any film based on a true story should be taken with a grain of salt. In this instance, the quote true story the film was based on came from the published works of demonologist Ed and Lorraine Warren, whose credibility varies depending on who you ask. Ostensibly, the true story of The Conjuring is the story of the Perron family, who moved into a 14-room farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island in 1971. There, Carolyn, Roger, and their 5 children claim to have experienced a series of disturbing occurrences shortly after they moved in. The alleged haunting began innocuously enough, with Carolyn noticing, for instance, that a broom was not in its usual place, or that small piles of dirt were appearing on her freshly cleaned floors. But the Perron's daughters claimed to see spirits around the house, not all of which were friendly. As Carolyn did more research into the home's history, she learned that it had been handed down through a single family for 8 generations before the parents purchased it, and many members of that family died in mysterious or unfortunate circumstances. Several children died in a nearby creek, one was murdered, and several more hanged themselves in the attic. Carolyn came to believe that her family was being tormented by one spirit in particular, Bathsheba, a spirit who, according to Andrea, the oldest of the Perron children, perceived herself to be the mistress of the house. Sure enough, there was once a Bathsheba Sherman who lived on the property, and she was believed to be a Satanist. Convinced it was her spirit that was haunting them, the Perrons got in touch with the Warrens to come and investigate their home and, with any hope, free them of the spirit of Bathsheba so they could live in peace. The Warrens' account of what happened next includes a number of chilling events, including one of the most haunting scenes in the movie in which Carolyn Perron becomes possessed by Bathsheba during a seance, speaking in tongues as she and her chair rose from the ground. But unlike in the film, where the Perrons thank the Warrens for banishing the spirit, the real-life Roger Perron kicked the Warrens out of his home, worried about his wife's mental stability. To this day, the Perrons stand by the events depicted in the film for the most part, and the Conjuring house has garnered a reputation for remaining haunted. But given how popular the film is and how much profit there is to be made off the old Perron house, it does raise some questions about just how true the supposedly true story really is. You're listening to History Uncovered, brought to you by the digital publisher All It's Interesting, where we explore the uncharted corners of the natural world and the world past. I'm All It's Interesting staff writer Austin Harvey.
And I'm All It's Interesting staff writer Kalina Fraga.
And today we are going over the real story that inspired The Conjuring. We've kind of done this in the wrong order because last year we did The Conjuring 2.
That's right.
The true story behind The Conjuring 2. So now we're talking about the first film. I forget. Have you seen The Conjuring?
I've seen this Conjuring, the first one. I haven't seen the second one. And I really liked the movie when I saw it, whenever it came out, like 2 years ago.
Yeah. I think it's the better movie. I think so. I think it's probably the best of the 3.
Yeah.
Largely because it doesn't it doesn't deal with Ed and Lorraine Warren too much. Like, they're in it, but it's much more focused on the family, whereas the other films kind of focus more on the Warrens. Right. Which leaves a gross taste in my mouth. If anyone listened to our Conjuring 2 episode, will understand why. And if you're listening maybe to your first episode or whatever, go back and listen to that one if you want to hear my thoughts on Ed and Lorraine Warren as people.
Yes.
But ignoring that, because there's a whole bunch of other controversy associated with this story in particular. Anyone who's seen the movie is at least tangentially familiar with what happened here. But to go over the sort of just timeline of events, June 1970, the Perron family move into a 14-bedroom farmhouse that was in Harrisville, Rhode Island. The matriarch of the family is named Carolyn Perron. Her husband's name is Roger. And they have 5 daughters: Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April. The family moves in January 1971. In June, Carolyn Perron heard about it being available. Almost immediately, they claimed they started to experience strange things. Carolyn said that the broom would often not be where she left it, as if it had moved elsewhere on its own. I will say I have had the exact same experience, but it's just forgetting where I put it.
Not too spooky. That's not too spooky.
Not too spooky yet. Maybe just you need some Adderall, it sounds like. But she would also claim that she heard a sound like a kettle being dragged against a wall.
Oh, so specific.
Really specific sound. She said small piles of dirt would also appear, even if she had just finished sweeping and the floor was pristine, which, again, maybe not that paranormal yet.
Maybe 5 kids and
you just missed a spot, maybe. I don't know.
That, yeah.
But every night, the Perron's daughters said that they were visited by a ghostly lady who smelled like flowers and would come into their rooms at night to tuck them in and kiss them, presumably not their mother.
That's creepy. Especially when it's like multiple girls are saying this. Like, that's weird.
Right. Like, oh, someone's coming to tuck us in every night. Dad, someone's just tucked us in. She smelled like flowers. It's like, well, your mom was out gardening.
That's alarm bells at that point.
No, she was kind of see-through. But they said for the most part, these spirits that were presumably haunting their home seems relatively harmless, except for one. And this is sort of the focus of the film, The Conjuring. Carolyn said she did some research into the history of the home and found that it had belonged to the Arnold family for 8 generations before they took it over. Many members of the Arnold family apparently died in mysterious or tragic ways. Some of them drowned in the nearby creek. Several were murdered. Others hung themselves in the attic. Carolyn said she found historical documentation suggesting that there was a woman named Bathsheba Sherman who once lived on the old Arnold estate, and that neighbors in the local community had accused Bathsheba Sherman of witchcraft and Satan worship.
Ooh. Yikes.
A lot of this information actually comes from books that Andrea Perron wrote about her family's experience. She wrote, I think 3 or 4. She wrote several books about living in this house. So a lot of this is her recounting, presumably, what her mother had told her.
Okay.
In her book, she later recalled, she said, whoever the spirit was, she perceived herself to be the mistress of the house, and she resented the competition my mother posed for that position. So it seems like they believed the spirit, we'll call her Bathsheba Sherman for now, was tormenting Carolyn Perron specifically because she was like, I'm the mother of this house, not you.
Wow. Creepy.
The Perrons fully believed that it was Bathsheba who was tormenting them. They even reportedly found out that apparently Bathsheba Sherman had been involved in the death of a neighbor's child when she was still alive, maybe linked to some sort of satanic ritual. Andrea then said that as time went on, things got worse. The family soon began to see other spirits and started to smell a scent like rotten flesh.
Oh, worse than flowers.
Yeah, significantly worse than flowers. A spirit that smells like flowers tucking you in at night honestly sounds kind of nice. This, not so much.
Not so nice.
She claimed that their beds would be lifted off the floor by spirits, and that her father said he always felt a cold, stinking presence behind him in the basement.
Ugh, don't like this.
Yeah. If any of this is starting to sound familiar, the movie kind of focuses in on a lot of these events as well. The basement is a huge thing. I know they often show the poster for The Conjuring is that a person was hung out by the creek.
Right.
So some of these themes kind of worked their way in. The family apparently tried their best to avoid the basement, which I don't blame them for in general. I don't like, creepy old basements. I don't think anyone does. But that was, of course, where the heating equipment was, and it would often break. So Roger had to go down there fairly often to fix it, which not ideal. The Warrens actually visited the family multiple times over the years. So it wasn't the movie obviously takes a little bit of a creative liberty there where it's like this one extended visit. But really they came back several times, and they would, this basically culminated in them conducting a seance, because the Warrens did not perform exorcisms, but they would perform seances to try and communicate with the spirit. In this case, they were trying to contact Bathsheba Sherman. This is kind of the climactic part of the movie here as well. During the seance, which Andrea claims she secretly witnessed. So presumably would have been like perched at the top of the basement stairs or something like that. She said during that seance, her mother reportedly became possessed, spoke in a strange language, and rose into the air with her chair. In the movie, Ed then performs an exorcism and drives the spirit out, but Lorraine clarified in real life that they would never do exorcisms because that needed to be done by a Catholic priest. What actually happened was that the seance was apparently such a disaster that Roger Perron kicked the Warrens out. He's like, don't come back. I don't want to see you again. He was worried that like he hadn't really spoken on it, but he was worried about his wife's mental stability, according to Andrea. So it's possible that he was like thinking his wife might be a little bit delusional here and that the Warrens performing these seances kind of reaffirmed her delusions.
Yeah.
Sort of like what we talked about with LaToya Ammons and what they thought might have been happening with her children.
Right. If she was feeding them her own like beliefs kind of and they were absorbing it. Well, I mean, the Warrens came and it seems like things were like not good and kind of scary, but then it became like much, much worse if like a disastrous seance happens.
Right. But I could see it if someone is like fully believing that they're possessed or being haunted.
Yeah.
And then you have these two people who are considered to be credible coming in and they're like, yes, you are being haunted.
Right.
We found evidence of it, how that could actually not be helpful. So, which is an interesting thing. So the Perrons lived there for 9 years. They moved out in 1980. And after that, they didn't experience any further hauntings.
Oh, so they stayed in the house after that.
They stayed in the house. So I don't know exactly when that seance incident with the Warrens happened. I'm not sure, but they, like I said, they'd been visiting for a couple years at that point. So this might have been
like near the end.
Near the end. But then, so here's where the issue starts to come up, right? So the movie, The Conjuring, is based mostly on the Warrens' account of what happened here. Andrea Perron, like I said, wrote several books about it as well. And between those two accounts, there are some pretty significant inconsistencies that when you take it all together, makes you go, how much of this story is true? And one thing that I always like to point out with any paranormal story is, you know, maybe ghost stuff, not so much, but like when somebody comes out and they're like, I was taken by aliens, a lot of people will then look at that person and go, you're crazy. No, you weren't. So you kind of lose personal credibility in a lot of cases when you say like, I was possessed or I was taken captive by aliens. However, if you can then turn that into a successful and financially beneficial book, well, now your crazy story has a little bit more of a reason to exist outside of the truth. In other words, someone who says this crazy event happened to them and then does not profit off of it, I find to be a little bit more believable, because it's like, why would you willingly put your reputation on the line for this?
Yeah. Someone who like lost their job, but it's like, I still stand by what I said or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Versus someone who like, look at the Amityville horror house, where there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that story was fabricated, but it made them a lot of money and it turned into a successful film franchise. Well, maybe there's a reason that it was told.
That's true.
So something to keep in mind as we go into this part. But yes, there were the Warrens' memoirs, and Andrea Perron wrote 3 separate books about her experiences in the Arnold estate. Within her own account, there are really, really big issues. The first 2 books, Andrea Perron maintains a belief that it was Bathsheba Sherman who tormented her family. However, historical records indicate there was a woman named Bathsheba Thayer in the area who was born in 1812, and she did go on to marry a farmer named Judson Sherman in Connecticut. The 2 of them together had a son named Herbert. Legends claim that Bathsheba was later caught sacrificing her own son to Satan with a sewing needle, placing a curse upon any who would dare live on her land before climbing a tree and hanging herself. That is something that we see in The Conjuring.
A sewing needle. It seems like a pretty hard way to kill someone.
Yeah. The Warrens also maintained this. They say it was Bathsheba Sherman who haunts the family. The Conjuring proceeds with that version of events. That's not quite accurate, though. This is what Andrea Perron and the Warrens are claiming. What really happened was that Bathsheba Thayer had a contented childhood, but reportedly grew up and she became like just an envied beauty. She was gorgeous. At the age of 32, she tied the knot. It would have been in 1844. And she and her husband ran a successful produce business on their farm in Harrisville, Rhode Island.
Okay.
But local women basically saw her as a threat, being as successful and beautiful as she was. And one time, while she was babysitting her neighbor's son, the boy mysteriously died, and local doctors claimed the child's skull had been impaled with a small yet fatal tool.
So like a sewing needle.
Like a sewing needle.
Pretty strong sewing needle.
Yeah. The case never went to court. Local women were enraged. And then it was later claimed that Bathsheba had killed her own son and hanged herself in 1849. But her tombstone shows that she actually died on May 25th, 1885. So that 1849 suicide is entirely fabricated. And the big thing here is where the truth and the legend start to, you see how they blended versus how the reality was. She didn't live on the Arnold estate. She lived on the Sherman estate nearby. So yes, there's a lot of rumors about this woman, a lot of which might have stemmed from jealousy and some pretty unfortunate circumstances. But then there are other parts of the story that are just completely made up. Yeah. And by the time the Perrons moved in, these things had become blurred.
Well, it's a long time. It's more than 100 years, it seems like. Sure, some of this stuff happened.
Yeah. But they're very, very like gung-ho about this theory initially. And then this is where the issue starts here. This information comes out. It's published by, I believe the Skeptical Inquirer did a story on it and a few other historians. And so with this new evidence now, Andrea Perron then changes her story in her third book. And she says, actually, no, it wasn't Bathsheba Sherman who tormented our family. It was Abigail Arnold, the matriarch of the Arnold estate, who hanged herself in the barn in 1797.
That's quite a change after you've written 2 books about something.
Yeah, for 2 books to maintain, like, no, it was Bathsheba Sherman, and then all of a sudden it's like, actually, it was Abigail Arnold. And even that theory doesn't really hold up because in her first 2 books, Andrea Perron describes the spirit of Abigail Arnold and refers to her as a presence of comfort and caring who never meant to frighten or disturb. It almost becomes like a little bit of a civil war here. So Andrea then starts to blame Lorraine Warren for the mix-up, saying that the Warrens had mistakenly identified Abigail as Bathsheba, and then even went as far as to say in an interview just 3 years ago in 2021 that the Conjuring films gave Bathsheba Sherman, quote, a really bad rap.
But she also wrote about Bathsheba Sherman.
She also wrote about Bathsheba Sherman for 2 books, so arguably more than the Warrens ever wrote about her. She then said, quote, the entity haunting and taunting my mother had a broken neck and was likely Mrs. Arnold, found hanging in the barn at the age of 93. That also does not hold up. There was no Mrs. John Arnold who was found hanging in the barn in 1797. There was a different Mrs. John Arnold named Susan Arnold, discovered hanging herself in 1866, but she was only 50 years old, as the Skeptical Inquirer notes, and she lived on a different property several miles away.
Lots of wires being crossed here.
Lots of wires being crossed. Another person or another source that just muddies the waters further is the actual website for the Conjuring house, because after the success of the movie, the property was purchased, and I believe it's changed hands a couple of times now. And they basically use it as like a paranormal museum where they say, hey, come on in. Maybe you'll see the spirits, or maybe you'll sense the spirits, and here's some, paraphernalia. Like they have a Raggedy Ann doll there. That's not the actual like Annabelle doll. So they're, again, making money off of this story. The Conjuring House website acknowledges that there was another woman named Abigail Cook Arnold who died at the age of 93 in 1869 in the Burrillville, Rhode Island area, but that her cause of death was simply old age, which makes her the only Mrs. Arnold that could realistically be haunting the estate. So the proprietors of the Conjuring House, who, yes, like I said, conduct ghost tours and seances, they say that some guests will still feel the presence of Abigail Arnold. In their version of events, Abigail Arnold was born to Martha Hopkins and Sylvanus Cook, married a farmer named John Arnold at the age of 19, and had 14 children over the course of 22 years, raising them in their massive estate throughout the 19th century.
A lot of kids in 22 years.
Yeah, 14-bedroom farmhouse, though, so.
That's true, yeah.
That's actually the only story that explains why there are so many bedrooms in this farmhouse.
Yeah.
I feel like they really had to justify it to themselves. They were like, why are there so many? Well, there's probably had 14 kids.
14 kids, wow.
The Conjuring House, the proprietors of the Conjuring House, they say that Abigail Arnold is not a malicious spirit, but that she will warn guests to get out if there is a malevolent spirit nearby.
Oh, so that kind of makes sense, kind of, because at first the spirit was really friendly and was tucking everyone in and smelled great and was sweeping the floor, it seems. So.
Right. There's presumably multiple spirits here.
Seems like it.
But it's no one can quite pin down the actual name of anyone. There, like I said, there was a Bathsheba Sherman. There were rumors about her back in the day, but there's no real tie to the Conjuring House property. There was an Abigail Arnold who kind of lived nearby. The Abigail Arnolds they've actually like named specifically who they say live at lived at the Conjuring House property straight up just did not.
Interesting.
There's just too many versions of events, and like the other issue is all of them effectively lack any credible historical evidence.
My theory, which has no basis at all except for what I just learned about this, is that that Bathsheba Sherman, so something happened with a child, and maybe one of the Abigail Arnolds was one of the women who like went after her. So when Bathsheba died, she started haunting Abigail. So it's like this, like she's still haunting her in the afterlife. So she's in the house too, and Abigail's like, doing her thing and sweeping the floor, and Bathsheba is haunting another ghost.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. So Bathsheba Sherman died in 1885. So let's look at the timeline here. When did this Abigail Arnold, this Susan Arnold, not Abigail Arnold, hung herself in 1866. So that those two overlap.
Wow. I gotta solve
But that's not Abigail Arnold, who they're saying. That's Susan Arnold. The Conjuring House claims Abigail Cook Arnold died at the age of 93 in 1869, which would still be earlier than Bathsheba Sherman.
I mean, you could haunt someone before or after they die. I mean, vice versa.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it sounds like their historical methods of research maybe are lacking a bit. I don't know. So
it reads to me like they had a conclusion they wanted, and then they found some historical evidence that can maybe support it. And they worked backwards from there.
It's probably also very possible.
I just really like the pettiness of like writing two full books that you made a lot of money off of about this one particular spirit who's haunting you. And then in the third book being like, actually, it wasn't her. And the reason I got it wrong is because of Lorraine Warren.
Yeah.
And I'm not one to shy away from dunking on the Warrens, but it does feel like we're passing the buck a little bit here.
I mean, if these like experts come to your house and they're like, this is who we think it is, like you would believe that, right? And then maybe you get new information.
Well, then I think it just shows a lack of research on Andrea Perron's part there as well.
It was pre-internet.
No.
I wasn't.
No. Let me see when her books came out. No, 2011, 2013, and 2015.
Well, I don't know. I think the weird thing about this story is that, at least from what I remember for some article at some point, was like multiple kids like did experience things, and the family did experience things, both parents, which I guess,
I will say, in my research, nothing from the other members of the Perron family came up. Andrea Perron's the one who wrote the books. And I didn't see interviews with any other
her siblings,
members of the Perron family speaking about this experience.
But the father at least said he felt like something in the basement.
According to
Andrea
Perron.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, okay, let's assume that they all did experience this, which I feel like if they didn't, maybe one of them would have come forward and been like, she's lying, which it sounds like no one has. Those stories are the ones that are interesting to me. It is like Latoya Amons because it's multiple people experiencing something strange, not just one person.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if like it would even be worth it for one of the other sisters to come out and say that she's lying, though.
I don't know. I mean,
if it's benefiting everyone.
That's true. I guess there's like your mother's memory, but maybe remembering her as someone haunted and not like maybe mentally ill is easier in some ways.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, even like looking now just to see, I was like, maybe I just missed something. But I really can't find any interviews with any other members of the Perron family. Like Andrea is the only one speaking about it now.
I think that does make sense in some ways. Like some families just have like one person who's like their spokesperson.
Yeah. Or their black sheep.
Mm-hmm.
So
true.
Maybe it's saving face, Maybe you don't want to come out and say like my sister's lying or fabricating a lot of this because you don't want to like embarrass them or something. You know what I mean? Or like cast their legacy in a negative light.
Yeah. It's just like not worth it to you. And yeah.
Yeah. Like, yeah, my sister's book,
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what the situation is there. I'm just speculating.
Well, if they moved into the house in the 70s as children, then now they would be, at least in their late 50s.
Yeah.
60s. So like maybe they're not on like TikTok making,
Sure, yeah. They have careers and lives.
Yeah, exactly.
And they've moved on from whatever that was.
Yeah.
Except one of them was like, nah, I'm going to write 3 books about this.
Why not? I mean, it kind of makes me want to watch the movie again. Maybe that'd be a good Halloween activity.
Yeah. It's not as scary as I remember it being.
Really?
But I also watch a lot more horror movies now, so that could be.
Yeah, I don't watch horror movies. Too scary. But this I felt like was like doable at the time whenever I saw it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good movie.
Yeah, maybe I'll revisit it. But it's an interesting story. And I assume the house is still there and
yeah, I mean, it's the same farmhouse. It's just, like I said, it's just like a ghost tour seance. You paid to go into it kind of deal. It doesn't look as creepy as the movie one, I will say. The movie one's definitely a lot more like foreboding looking than the actual house.
That makes sense. You got to give it the Hollywood filter and everything.
For sure. Yeah. But I just think it's really interesting how many different stories and versions of events there are. And how, because as I was researching this and I've written for the website about the Conjuring house specifically, I tried to do some digging to see if I could look through historical records to verify anyone's claims about this. So, you look up Abigail Arnold's Harrisville, Rhode Island, and the only website that references her is the Conjuring house website. And I'm like, well, you're not like a historical authority here. I would like to see like birth records and like governmental documentation. I couldn't find any of that.
You might have to, it might be something you'd have to get like an ancestry.com subscription or even go to like a local
contact
history museum.
The county office or something.
Yeah.
Right. But that's what I mean. It's just like, it's so hard to verify any of these claims that I don't feel comfortable saying like, this is the definitive version of the story. And I think it's wise to look at all of them skeptically and say like, you're all profiting off of this. So any version of this story that makes you money is therefore your truth here.
It is funny to think about like ghost stories in the internet age because, 50 years ago, someone could be like, well, the legend says that this house was owned by blah, blah, blah. And what are you going to do? You're like, oh, okay. I mean, I guess you could go to the local history museum and try to find out. But you kind of are like, oh, all right, that's the legend. Then I'm going to believe the legend. And now we can try to, find out on the internet.
Right. Easier than ever to fake things, but also easier than ever to debunk things.
Yeah.
So
this is kind of a fascinating theme that's come up. It came up last time too with Latoya Amons with the idea of like everyone has phones now. You can film things or whatever. And there was like a period of time that's over now, but it was like it was too hard to like fake things.
Right.
That looked
you had to know
really
like
real.
really how to edit video at one point. Now there's probably a TikTok filter that puts a ghost in the corner.
Sure, or you have an AI.
Whatever.
I don't know anything about AI videos, but they look pretty real, the ones I've seen online. And yeah, it seems like people have that ability now. And so now we've moved past this period of like, phones can capture ghosts. It's too easy to fake this.
Footage is reliable, or or a photograph, right? Like a photograph from 1930 that shows a ghost. You're like, whoa, that's crazy.
Right.
A photo, one I take on my phone and then Photoshop a ghost into. Well, now it's not so.
Yeah, and people aren't going to believe it. And that's interesting. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about how that's evolved.
Yeah. Well, I'd be curious to hear what the listeners think about this episode and this story in particular. If you're listening and you're a fan of The Conjuring and you like the movie and maybe you've done some research, or if you've gone to the Conjuring house yourself, or if you've read Andrea Perron's books or whatever it may be, let us know by sending an email over to podcast@allthat'sinteresting.com and give us your thoughts on this episode and what you feel about the story of the Perrons and Bathsheba Sherman and Abigail Arnold's.
Yeah, and if you prefer to leave a voicemail, you can do that too. Just call us up at 929-526-3029, and we do listen to all of those. So yeah, love to hear people's thoughts about the story, the movie, the family, the legend, all of it.
Yes, would be very curious. If you want to know a little bit more about this, or you prefer to digest your stories by reading, you can check out more about this on allthat'sinteresting.com. We've got stuff about pretty much all of the Conjuring movies and the true stories that inspired them, stuff about Ed and Lorraine Warren, stuff about the Conjuring house in particular. So you can go over there and check that out. And you can also become a member of this podcast at allthat'sinteresting.com/membership. For just $5 a month. That'll get you the bonus show, the History Happy Hour, that'll be coming up next for members if you are one. If you aren't one, consider subscribing. Really helps us out. You can also join our newsletter at allthat'sinteresting.com/sign up. That way you never miss a story. We are constantly publishing new things.
Constantly. Every day, new stuff. And there's also social media, but I can't remember any of the handles. So
yeah, you can check out some clips from the podcast on Instagram at Real History Uncovered, I'm mixing that up. On Instagram at History Uncovered Podcast, or on TikTok at Real History Uncovered, if you want some short form clips to share with your friends.
Yeah. And in the meantime, just check us out on the site. Once again, there's new stuff every day, especially for spooky season. We're very into that here. So, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with, I'm not sure if we actually have anything.
Yeah. I don't think we've picked the topic yet.
But something great, I'm sure.
Something interesting, for sure.
Always interesting, yes. In the meantime, I guess happy Halloween and have good spooky times.
Yeah.
I know we both have plans to do that, so.
Yes, we do. Do not eat too much candy.
Yes, not too much candy.
It's bad for you, but it tastes so good.
There's no longer candy at my Halloween parties. There's just alcohol, so I guess that's a new vice.
Yeah, that's the adult candy.
Yeah, adult candy.
Yeah.
Happy Halloween, everyone, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with something new.